It's time now for Igniting Change, a weekly provocative and empowering program where you, the listener, can ignite change. Now here's your host, Barbara Arnwine.
Get up, stand up.
Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Igniting Change. Oh, we have a great show for you today. And we want to make sure that you are ready to hear from some amazing voices about issues that you've been wondering about and you wanted more clarity, more information. Well, you're going to get it today. Let me bring up my mighty co-host, because before we get into our show, we want to pay a tribute to the people who have suffered in our nation and around the globe. So let me get to my wonderful co-host. You know he is one of the most amazing lawyers in the country. He is a bold, energetic, and creative leader, sacrificial, just does what he has to do to make sure that justice prevails in our country. He is one of the most astute voting rights lawyers in our nation, and I am just honored that he's also the chair of the board of the Transformative Justice Coalition. Yes, our organization where we work as co-leaders. I am so happy to bring up none other than Daryl D. Jones. Hey, Daryl. Daryl?
Hey, Barbara. It must be Tuesday, must be noon Eastern Standard Time because the devil is busy working, trying to put me on mute so he can't hear me. That's all right. That's all right. To overcome the devil the way I overcome some of these judges. Just keep on talking and take it off mute. Right. But Barbara, my goodness, what a great show we have set for today. I can barely wait to get into it. And I tell you, we have a lot of things to recognize, a lot of things really to be thankful for and to be knowledgeable of this season of giving and this season that many in the religious community are celebrating various religious figures and significances. And, our hearts and minds, our hearts, Barbara, and condolences definitely go out to Rob Reiner and his wife and the family with all that they're going through. And I know you wanted to extend some other condolences.
Shame. No. Shame on Trump. Shame. How dare you call yourself a president and demean and make fun of somebody's death because you disagree with them politically. How horrid. But anyway, I have to say that, Daryl. There's just no way we can, in this era, ignore the savagery of his posts regarding Rob Reiner and Michelle.
You're absolutely right, Barbara. We've got to learn to be able to disagree without being disagreeable, and certainly, how to be civil in our political disagreements. You don't have to like everything that everyone stands for, but you do need to respect their existence as a human being. You do need to respect their family and who they are as a person. You don't have to agree with everything they do or everything they say, but you certainly should respect their existence and their point of view, Barbara. I agree with you 100% on that.
Yes, and we want to send out a special word of prayer, a special word of tribute to the lives that were lost in Brown University and to those who were wounded and injured by whatever this, madness was. Whoever did this, our condolences to everybody. Also, our hearts, really crack and just, oh my goodness, I can't even begin to talk about, the horrific Bondi Beach attack on those trying to celebrate Hanukkah. Just the cruelty that this world, breeds over and over and over again because of, religious hate and because of, when I say that, let me be clear, everybody who engages in religious hate has to be held accountable. and it's just wrong in this season when we celebrate Christ, the Lord, as those of us who do celebrate Him, celebrate the peace that He represents, not the anger, not a sword, but the fight for righteousness. Daryl, I didn't know if you wanted to add on to that before we get into our really amazing show today.
Yeah, no, Barbara, I think you're 100% on point with regards to those expressions. I'd also, caution people, particularly at this moment, to be careful. Let's not rush to judgment on folks.
Yeah.
I mean, the young man that was accused in the Brown University shooting, it looks right now to be falsely accused.
Right.
Let's hesitate, folks. Let's take a breath. Let's let investigations do what investigations do. Investigate before we have any type of rush for judgments. My heart right now, Barbara, it goes out to that young man out of Wisconsin because, if in fact he was not involved, as it appears as though to be the situation, what they have done to him and sullying his name across the nation, recover. I don't know that it's repairable, Barbara. I just don't know.
Yes. So, our show today, everyone, is a serious show. We are going to be talking about the long arm of the past. You heard me, the long arm of the past. The misdeeds of the Roberts Supreme Court of the United States and the recently released Maryland lynching report. Wow. Two very heavy subjects, but subjects that we have to be aware of, and we're bringing you this show because the mainstream media won't do this. They won't talk about these issues. And at the center of our show today is the first, opening segment. We're going to be talking about an amazing book. Woo! If you don't have this book, come on, folks. You got to get it. And not only do you want to buy this book, you want to share it with everybody you know. I've been reading. I can't. It is a page burner. It is a wonderful book, and it's just amazing. The name of the book is Without Precedent: How Chief Justice Roberts and his accomplices rewrote the Constitution and dismantled our rights. It is written by our guest today, none other than Attorney Lisa Graves. She is a nationally recognized expert on right-wing influence over the federal courts. She previously served as Deputy Assistant Attorney General at the U.S. Department of Justice. She was a chief counsel for nominations for Senator Patrick Leahy on the Senate Judiciary Committee and Deputy Chief of the Article III Judges Division for the U.S. Courts. Graves is currently the Executive Director of the True North Research, co-founder of Court Accountability. Yes, everybody, you remember we've had Alex Aronson on, and we love him, and she works with him closely. She's also president of the board of the Center for Media and Democracy and a trustee of the Parks Foundation, one of those really powerfully, wonderfully, racial justice and social justice foundations that has been so bold in these times when other foundations are stepping back. Her work has appeared in the New York Times, Slate, Time, The Hill, The Nation, in these times, in the Progressive, and she co-hosts Legal AF, okay now, on the Midas Touch Network. She writes the Grave Injustice column on Substack and co-hosts the 5, 8.5 webcast on YouTube. You can follow her on Substack. You can watch her on YouTube. And you can also listen to her Midas Touches, Legal AF, and learn more. And you can learn so much more and get the book at https://withoutpresident.info/about. Folks, we are so happy to welcome to our show one of the smartest, most brilliant minds, researchers, and advocates in this country, Lisa Graves. Welcome, Lisa.
Gosh, Barbara, that was one of the most lovely introductions I've ever had. I am genuinely honored to be on your show with you, Barbara, and with Daryl, and have the chance to speak to your amazing audience. So, gosh, I'm blushing over here on the phone. You can't see it, but thank you so much for such a warm, warm welcome.
Well, it's your amazing work. I mean, your book is just seminal. It is so beautiful. It's wonderful. And I just, we're gonna definitely talk about it. And Daryl, for the second half of the show, we have two other guests who will be joining us, and we will introduce them at that time, correct?
That's correct, Barbara.
Yes. And we're looking forward to, talking about that lynching report. Now, first of all, when I read a book as thoroughly documented, as thoroughly researched, as profoundly, written. I mean, there's just chapter after chapter, paragraph after paragraph that just makes you just sit up. And it has been like a revelation reading so much of this book. Please, Lisa, helping our people understand why did you write this book?
Well, thank you so much. I did try to write it to be a page turner, which is not common in the legal policy arena, but I really wanted people to know, this is who these people are. This is why we're in this situation. And in particular, I believe that John Roberts has really been the subject of too much positive PR, given the fact that he was chosen to roll back our rights, and he has systematically done so, particularly targeting voting rights, the most important rights as a gateway to all other rights. And I wrote it because I want people to understand who John Roberts is, where he came from, his deep ties to this very regressive anti-civil rights agenda on the right, and what's happening next in terms of this ongoing attack on our rights and this effort to back up Trump. I think a lot of people have been shocked by the rulings of the court over the past 18 months in particular, and longer for some of us. But I wrote the book because people just do not know who John Roberts is, and what you don't know can hurt you and probably has hurt you.
No, one part of the book, you talk about the one word that describes John Roberts. And that word you used was persistent. Persistent. Yeah. Persistent. Tell us, and what is, give our audience who's out there thinking about their, gifts for this season, thinking about the time they're going to be reading, thinking about what's going on in our nation and worrying about to make sure that they understand what's truly going on. Tell people, give them an overview of this book and why it has caused the ripples that it's caused in exposing this evil network of anti-democratic and anti-so many forces.
Well, yes, patience and persistence are good attributes for all of us, but if they are devoted to an extreme agenda, then that persistence can really become a weapon, particularly when the person devoted to that agenda is given this extraordinary amount of power at the top of the Supreme Court. And John Roberts is someone who, based on my research into his past, his jobs, his activities, he's someone who has been actually very rigid. If I had the generosity of spirit, I would say it's sad that someone who is smart could be so rigid and so determined to roll back our rights. But I'm not sad about it. I'm actually mad about it because, we put people into positions as judges because the hope is that they'll be fair. That's, why we have judges, and they're not always fair. And obviously there are a lot of instances over time where they have not been fair. But in this instance, we have a Supreme Court of the United States where John Roberts wasn't chosen because they thought he would be fair. They chose him. He was chosen by this right-wing apparatus because they thought he would be a ringer. that he would be a sure vote in rolling back our rights, and he really has been. And in our recent history, there was this period where the right wing had this chant, "No more suitors," which was about having no more judges like David Souter, who had been a former justice on the New Hampshire Supreme Court. And when he got to the U.S. Supreme Court, he actually followed the precedent. And they despised him for that. So that's why when John Roberts was nominated, there weren't any no more suitors chants. When George W. Bush then tried to nominate his personal lawyer, Harriet Miers, all these no more suitors chants came up. And so she was pulled down. And Sam Alito was put in because they were not people who were perceived as being fair. They were people who were perceived as being operatives to do the job of rolling back the advances of the 20th and 21st century. And that's what John Roberts has done. And there's more to that history that I would love to talk with you about. But that's the thing, is that this court is dismantling your rights, my rights, our rights that were won with blood, sweat, and tears. And he's doing so with arrogance and cavalierly to the consequences of our ability to have fair representation in our democracy.
Wow.
And Lisa, when you say that Justice Roberts isn't fair, that word "fair," could you just sort of expand on that a little bit? I mean, folks are, we have, a lot of non-lawyers that are listening and say, well, what do you mean that the justice isn't fair? You mean he's not listening to things? What, he's not fairly listening? What do you mean by he's not fair?
Yes. Well, there's a couple of elements to that. There are a couple of elements. One is that the Supreme Court, is supposed to follow this Latin phrase called stare decisis, which means to defer to things basically that are decided. So unless there's a really good reason to change a legal precedent, those precedents hold. And in the case of Roberts, what we're seeing is him aggressively disregarding precedents. So, for example, in the immunity decision last year, that outrageous counter-constitutional decision to invent immunity from criminal prosecution for Donald Trump, that's not anywhere in the Constitution. That's not anywhere in our history. That's not part of our legal precedents. But John Roberts went out of his way to create precedent to allow Donald Trump to get off the hook for the crimes he was accused of, effectively pardoning him, and then paving the way for his return to power by blocking the trial against him from proceeding. And then this year, in 24 separate decisions, these emergency rulings by the Supreme Court that aren't really emergencies. They're emergencies because Trump has claimed he's been blocked from doing things that other judges have found to be unconstitutional, illegal, in violation of statutes or regulations or precedents or contracts. This court, the Roberts Court, has aggressively overturned lower court rulings temporarily stopping Trump, allowing his extreme policies to go forward, even though lower courts issued detailed factual findings for why they were restraining the administration. And similarly, in the decision just a week or so ago, in the Texas case, that lower court judge was a Trump appointee who found that the actions of Texas violated the Voting Rights Act, were definitely documented as being racially based in terms of diluting the black vote in Texas. And yet the Roberts Court disregarded those factual findings, ignored them to allow those maps, those racially discriminatory maps, to go forward with the effect of removing people from office, like Representative Crockett and others, purposefully. And so you have a court, I guess the last thing I'll say is, in general, the lower courts, the trial courts, are the ones who are supposed to find facts. And similarly, Congress, in the Voting Rights Act, made detailed factual findings about the importance of the Voting Rights Act, what would happen if it was not renewed, if its key provisions were not renewed. Thousands of pages of facts about how these white Southern legislatures in particular, had been trying to use the law to minimize the black vote, to dilute black votes. And Roberts cast that aside, arrogantly decided that he could just deem that things had changed. And so therefore we didn't need some of those key provisions of the Voting Rights Act in 2013. And he's about to do it again on Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act in a case coming out of Louisiana, the So this is John Roberts and his cohorts trying to dismantle a law that they have no business dismantling as a court. That's not the role of this court, to assert that the Civil Rights Act of 64 or the Voting Rights Act of 1965 are somehow no longer relevant or cannot be used to protect voting rights in the year 2025, 2026.
And this is a court. This is a court that has an agenda. Roberts is not tabula rasa. He absolutely has an agenda. He knows what he wants. And what has been so remarkable about your book is watching how he has postured himself, ingratiated himself, misrepresented himself in order to be in the position that he is in as Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, in order to operationalize and bring into being this agenda, right? Let's talk about some aspects of this agenda, because you just talked about the voting rights one, but there's, and of course there's Citizens United, but let's also talk about some of the other things they've done.
Yeah. What about that corruption, Barbara? What about that corruption?
Yes.
Yeah. Let me pause for a second just on the voting rights side, just to make one other piece clear, which is John Roberts began his legal career attacking the Voting Rights Act. How did he get that job? He got that job because he clerked for the most anti-voting rights justice on the Supreme Court, a man named William Rehnquist, who used his powers as an attorney to try to intimidate voters in the black neighborhoods in Phoenix, in Bethune, photographing black voters and claiming he was just photographing Democrats. So that's who he clerks for, that man. And that man called Ken Starr at the Justice Department in the Reagan administration and said, you got to hire my guy, to the top of the Justice Department. And what was John Roberts assigned to do? Take on the attack of Congress when it was trying to repair a terrible decision of Bill Rehnquist and his cohorts on the Supreme Court that had limited the ability of courts to consider disparate impact, the effect of changes in voting rights on Black Americans in particular. John Roberts threw himself into that work. That's what he did. He had no experience. He had no prior work experience in voting rights. He never worked in that field, but he had devotion to that agenda. And when he was nominated and that question came up by Senator Kennedy, Roberts dodged it. Oh, I was just a young attorney. I have no, I was just following orders. No, that is his life's work. And then that's why that Selby decision came down. But it's more than that. The corruption thing is really astonishing, because you have a court that has been engulfed in investigative reports about corruption. John Roberts has tried to thwart every effort to contain that corruption, to investigate it, to put on new rules, binding rules. He's tried to thwart that. And he's also been part of decisions that have allowed corruption, basically authorized it. The same year that they issued these other major decisions allowing Trump to get off the hook, this Roberts court issued a decision saying that a public official, as long as he got the money after the fact from, from a contractor, he could count that as a tip, a gratuity for a job well done, that didn't count as bribery. The guy in the case that Roberts and his buddies let off, he actually had steered a contract to a local business and then came to them for cash. And they testified against him at trial, and the jury found that the guy had violated federal bribery law, federal anti-corruption law, but not for this court, not for Roberts and Kavanaugh and his cohorts. They decided to say they were going to let this guy off the hook and just say public officials can receive gifts, basically, after the fact, which makes me wonder whether, some of the gifts that have gone to Clarence Thomas are just considered by John Roberts and his buddies as just tips for a job well done. But those gifts that, for example, Alito and Thomas have been received from billionaires that have actual interest before the court, that want the law to change in ways that advantage their business or their political ideology, their agenda. And so it's not without consequence. The consequence is that our rights get limited, that our ability to hold corporations accountable get limited. And so I think of this court as just engulfed in corruption, and John Roberts has actively tried to prevent Congress from doing anything about it. And in fact, I think the reason is he needs their votes. He needs the votes of Alito and Thomas to accomplish this radical, reactionary, regressive, repressive agenda.
No, one of the most, there's so much in this book that just makes me, sit up because, so many of the characters that you mentioned, Boyden Gray, I worked across the table with him in the Department of Justice offices when we were trying to hammer out the Civil Rights, the Civil Rights Act of 1964, and we were trying to renew it after that horrible Supreme Court session in which they dismantled so many of the employment laws. And when we sat across from each other, and he was as arrogant and as evil as your book, makes clear. But what I didn't know was all the background and the family background and how this was inherited, evil. Leonard Leal, all of his roles, the Koch brothers, all of these connections. And when you were being interviewed by Senator Whitehouse, in that great, interview, which I recommend everybody go and watch on YouTube. In that interview, you talked about how Amy Coney Barrett and Roberts and other members who are now on the court were all part of the 2000 Bush versus Gore effort. I mean, good grief, Lisa, how deeply embedded this evil is that sits on the court that's destroyed our abortion rights and everything else. Tell us some more about those kinds of factors that people just don't know about this court.
Well, I'm so glad you brought that up because this weekend was the anniversary of that terrible decision by the Republicans on the Supreme Court in 2020 that stopped the recount in Florida and made George W. Bush president. Even though Al Gore had won the popular vote and subsequent counting of those votes by the media found that he would have won Florida and we would have had an entirely different trajectory. But what became clear as I was researching the book was that John Roberts played a far more active role in that litigation than he really admitted to. Then it was sort of hidden that he helped craft the arguments before the Florida Supreme Court that became the arguments before the Supreme Court that stopped that recount. But not only him, Brett Kavanaugh was there in Florida helping the Bush team try to stop the recount. But not only Kavanaugh. Amy Coney Barrett was there trying to stop the recount. So 3 of the 6 members on the majority faction of this court that gave Trump this immunity, that have paved the way for this extraordinary expansion of presidential power this year, were there in Florida helping to stop people's votes from being recounted. And the other part that you mentioned on C. Boyden Gray, this is the person who helped get Clarence Thomas put on the court, who played a role in the federal judiciary for decades. C. Boyden Gray, his background is that one of his forebears was the man, Burton Crange, who signed the secession documents for North Carolina to secede from the Union in the Civil War. And then fast forward a couple decades, his father, who was helming the beginnings of a media empire, tobacco money that was built on the backs of black workers, people who'd been enslaved and then subsequently, pushed back into those plantations. His father had a party that was hosted at the all-white country club in North Carolina, and the party that his best friends hosted celebrated the Nazi theme in the late 1930s with people wearing uniforms and carrying signs, "Who do you want to dictate?" And this was Hitler was invading other countries in Europe. And so, and we know that because the pictures were published, and it wasn't an accident. It was published in the paper that was led by Boyden Gray's father, who had other things that happened. He also made the decision as the Secretary of as a major defense leader in the post-World War II era. He's the one who ordered that Robert E. Lee's painting be hung at West Point, hanging over the cadets with a black man in the background holding on to Robert E. Lee's horse. And that was a sign of that devotion to that secessionist tradition, that repugnant secessionist tradition. And the following year, after he ordered that Robert E. Lee be hailed as a hero, despite being a traitor and a person who helped lead to the deaths of hundreds of thousands of Americans, the next year, C. Boyden Gray's father resigned from the University of North Carolina in light of the Brown versus Board of Education decision because he didn't want to see public universities integrated. That's the man who had such an extraordinary influence on who is on our Supreme Court, and that's the man who really has been a mentor to Leonard Leo and others in this effort to pack the court with people who have a regressive agenda for America.
Wow. Thank you so much for this interview. You got to come back, because what we want to do in the next segment, when we bring you back on our show, please agree to do so, because we want to talk about court reform, what it looks like,
and
how it's
united.
done.
Yes.
And so let's plan to do that. You and I'll talk after the show about a time that we can get you back on. But please tell people how to buy your book and the title and how to buy it, because we want everybody to know what is in this book. It's amazing, people. You absolutely must read it. I'm willing to even do a book club on it because it's just so important. I'm really serious, folks. I'm willing to put together a book club on Zoom, and we can go through the book in more depth. But tell people right now how they can buy the book.
Well, thank you, Barbara, and thank you, Daryl. And I say yes to your kind offer to return. You can buy the book anywhere you buy books. It's called Without Precedent, how Chief Justice Roberts and his accomplices rewrote the Constitution and dismantled our rights. So it's Without Precedent. That's with a C, not president, with an S. My name is Lisa Graves. And so if you look up Lisa Graves and John Roberts or Lisa Graves Without Precedent, you'll find it. And I would be honored to come back on your show and honored to participate in a book club, Barbara. It's wonderful. I appreciate all the amazing work that you're doing, and Daryl does to defend voting rights, and all the work you do with your amazing audience there. Thank you so much for having me on.
Thank you. You are the most amazing writer. You're the most amazing advocate. Your research is amazing. I just want everybody to know what you shared in this interview, but also I want everybody to read this book. Thank you so much, Lisa.
Thank
Daryl?
you. Thank you both.
Yep, thank you, Lisa. Look forward to seeing you soon. And Barbara, hopefully, absolutely. And it's something great for this holiday season is to pick up a copy of that book and share it with your loved one as something to discuss. That's just an awesome book, an awesome gift, great thing to put under your tree. Well, Barbara, it's not the smoothest of transitions to talking about things being under the tree, but I'm hoping that Chris Haley is with us, and Chris, has Mr. Haley joined us?
Yes, I have.
Okay, and hopefully we have Dr. David Fakunle. Dr. Fakunle, are you there?
I'm here. Yes.
All right.
Fantastic. So, Barbara, let's do this pivot. Let's go over it because here recently, within the last couple of weeks, the Maryland legislature had directed some time ago that there would be a Maryland Lynching Truth and Reconciliation Commission that would really dig into the research and some of the work behind what has gone on to studying the aspects of enslavement in the state of Maryland. What should be done, what's the reach of it, and many of these other pieces that the legislature wanted to know in preparation, perhaps for reparations or something like that, and actions to be taken in the future. And in fact, the legislation that was introduced that actually created the commission one of the introducers, one of the sponsors, was Delegate Jocelyn Pena-Melnick. And Delegate Melnick, as we are speaking, it's now 12:35, is probably taking the oath of office to now become the Speaker of the House for the state of Maryland's House of Delegates. So congratulations to her. I want to welcome to our show for their initial debut, Dr. David O. Fakunle, who is the chair of the Maryland Lynching, Truth, and Reconciliation Commission. He's an assistant professor at the School of Community Health and Policy at Morgan State University. He is a mercenary for change, employing the necessary skills and occupying the necessary spaces to help strengthen everybody, divested from their truest self, particularly those who identify as Black, Indigenous, or persons of color. You know, Dr. Fakunle serves as an assistant professor of public and allied health at Morgan State University at the School of Community Health and Policy. He's an associate faculty in mental health at the Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health. He's formerly an adjunct assistant professor at the University of Florida Center for Arts and Medicine. Let me tell you, Dr. Fakunle, you know, he's a storyteller. He's just such an incredible reach of information. His PhD is in education, you know, and just an incredible person. And I would be remiss, because he's a fellow Terp, I would be remiss if I did not say that he got his BA from the University of Maryland at College Park. So, Dr. Fakunle, welcome to your maiden voyage here on Igniting Change.
Well, good morning and good afternoon, and thank you for having me. It's an honor.
And, Barbara, we also have with us a person who is no stranger to me. I think we've been associated for, it seems like, as long as he's been in Maryland and in the area. He's the nephew of the Roots author Alex Haley, a descendant of Kunta Kinte. Chris Haley grew up with the unique fascination of American history. You know, he pursued his own professional studies in the field of African American history. His knowledge of the past helps to illuminate the present for his colleagues and audiences. He's director of both the study of legacy, the study of the legacy of slavery in Maryland at the Maryland State Archives Research Department and Utopia Film Festival in Greenbelt, Maryland. He's also served on many prestigious boards in the world of African American genealogy, as well as in the arts. You know, he's been part of the Kunta Kinte Alex Haley Foundation, the Historic London Town Foundation, Jake Savage Foundation. My goodness, you know, in addition to being, you know, a historian, he's also an author, and he's an actor. I mean, he's all.
Daryl. All right. Daryl will be back with us. Something happened, but yeah, something happened with his sound. Dr. Fakunle, thank you so much for joining us today. Can you just tell people about this new report from your commission and about why it's, you know, so important for people to know about the Maryland, lynching report? Can you please tell people about it?
Yeah, so the final report from the Maryland Lynching, Truth, and Reconciliation Commission came out officially a few days ago, and It is the culmination of 6 years of meaningful work that was done by the commissioners, the staff, many volunteers, many local coalitions around the state of Maryland, who all shared their insight, their wisdom, their living experience, their history, so that we could tell as complete a story as our capacity allowed about the legacy of racial terror lynching in the state of Maryland. So the commission started in 2019. We were charged with exploring the history of racial terror lynchings, which officially spanned from 1854 to 1933, along with solidifying the known history of racial terror lynchings, for which there were about 40 confirmed during that time. We also had the latitude to explore unconfirmed cases of racial terror lynchings, to have the opportunity to clarify on cases of racial terror lynching. One of the first things that we had to do was to specify that we were exploring racial terror lynching. So those were acts of murder committed by white mobs against a black person, usually black men or boys. That was done for the preservation of a racial hierarchy. And so that gave us a very narrow scope by which we could explore cases that were known and unknown, and to, again, the best of our abilities, clarify and confirm whether they were racial terror lynchings. In addition, we had the opportunity to conduct hearings across the state. These were regional hearings where we visited the counties where racial terror lynchings were confirmed to have taken place. We explored the history that we knew at the time of those hearings. We made space for historians and genealogists and local civic leaders and civil rights leaders who were committed not just to the history of those lynching cases, but really to the history of racial terrorism and the damage that it had and continues to do in many areas around the state of Maryland, predominantly those that are majority black. And with all of that information, our final charge was to create this report that not only chronicled the history, but offered recommendations for any semblance of justice and repair and healing that could be done by the state of Maryland for the commission of these racial terror lynchings. It's important for people to know that a very common theme across the cases, no matter what part of the state it took place in, was complicity. There was complicity by multiple sectors in these different areas. Sometimes it did reach the level of the state and went beyond just local. And at worst, or at best, there was negligence. At worst, there was just the allowance of racial terror lynchings. Part of our
participation, right?
That too, yeah. And it's the whole notion that there was sometimes explicit, but oftentimes implicit kind of understanding that lynchings were necessary to preserve the racial hierarchy. So oftentimes you would see in white-led media spaces the wording of racial terror lynchings as some commission of justice. This was needed in order to, again, keep things the way that they need to be. You compare that to black-led media, which confirmed what it really was. It was terrorism. It was murder. It was racially motivated. And that's why for our work, media was very, very important. So we give special love to the Afro-American newspaper, which was a consistent source of truth when it came to racial terror lynching cases in Maryland. And so the final report presents all of this. There's nothing that we have hidden from all the work that we've done over the past several years. And the recommendations, again, are meant to coalesce what can be done to bring justice as much as we can to this legacy. And it really goes to looking at all the systems and all the mechanisms that allow for racial terror lynchings to occur. And so for those that read our final report, and you can find it on the MLTRC website, you will see that it is very holistic. For example, we talk about an apology, an acknowledgement of responsibility. We talk about the material reparations. We talk about reform and the strengthening of reform to criminal justice, community healing, education, mental health, even the importance of symbolism when it comes to reparations, further acknowledging the truth, the necessary changes to media that would help to prevent the proliferation of false narratives that can lead to racialized violence. And then we certainly talk about what is needed for the implementation, the support, and the monitoring of these recommendations. So we aim to be as thorough and as encompassing as possible to show what it actually takes to bring repair to this legacy, because the damage is generations old. And so the repair has to be generations old and has to cover all major aspects of society.
And, this is really timely because, as we're speaking, the Maryland legislature is in a special session. Not only are they selecting the new Speaker of the House, but they're also looking at taking up the whole override of the veto of the reparations bill in the state of Maryland. Dr. Fakunle, could you share with our audience 1885, Howard Cooper, just by way of explanation of some of the things that how communities would have been traumatized if you could lift up the Howard Cooper situation out of Baltimore County with regards to community trauma, explaining what occurred there and the community trauma as it applies in that type of situation. And then we want to intertwine all that in with the reparations piece.
Sure. Well, the first thing to say about Howard Cooper was that he was a child. Let's start there.
Wow.
And one of the things that we was certainly, I think, reaffirmed for us during the duration of our work was that, yes, many of the victims of racial terror lynching were children. We would often say young men or things like that. No, children, to really emphasize the barbarism, the sadism that were often associated with racial terror lynchings. So the lynching of Howard Cooper took place in Towson, Maryland, and certainly was a model, for lack of a better word, of how encompassing the terrorism actually was. So oftentimes you would see the overkill of a black body. It wasn't just about the hanging per se, it was the complete desecration of the body. Oftentimes it would be done in a public space. So this is certainly a reference to Sherilyn Eiffel's book, On the Courthouse Lawn. That was a very common location of racial terror lynchings, and she so beautifully juxtaposed this idea of terrorism happening in a space of justice. So near the courthouse, near the sheriff's office, near the jail, it was often immediately juxtaposed with these spaces of justice where these lynchings would take place. Howard Cooper was one of the relatively few black men and boys that actually went to trial before the lynching occurred. So part of what we try to convey is that we are not here to judge the presumed guilt or innocence of the black men and boys who were lynched, although and oftentimes they were innocent of what they were charged for. We are calling out the fact that, amongst other things, they did not receive due process under the law. And so it was a crime against humanity, and it was, again, an insult to the justice system. As with many racial terror lynchings, there were crowds and audiences that that wanted to be in the space of the racial terror lynching. That is one thing that makes it quite unique, is the public nature of the crime, of the murder. It was something where there were plenty of witnesses to the murder, and yet when we got to any attempts to bring justice to the crime, no one was known. In certain cases, the body would be left hanging wherever the crime was committed because it was meant to serve as a symbol. Racial terror lynchings are message crimes where white communities, those who committed the crimes, those who were associated with the crimes, wanted black communities to know, if you step out of line of the racial hierarchy, this is what can happen to you. So it was a powerful mode of communication to, again, stay in line. And oftentimes the families of racial terror lynching victims, whether they spoke out or not, would leave the area out of fear for their own lives. And so that of Howard Cooper's lynching covers a lot of these kind of core themes and core behaviors that were ever present across the majority of racial terror lynching cases in Maryland. And so we want people to know that this was a design. There was a strategy by which racial terror lynchings often took place. And you'll see these common intersections with elements of society, elements of government, where, again, at best it was negligence, at worst it was complicity. So we did our best to really unpack all the nuances of each case as much as we could. Again, the earliest being 1854, the latest being 1933. So there was definitely a spectrum of material that were just available for us to find. But to paint as rich a picture of what this may look like, and again, just all the hands, metaphorically speaking, and sometimes literally, that were part of these murders.
And as I understand it, and I don't know if Chris Haley is still with us or not. If he is, he can respond. If not, Dr. Okay, hey, Chris. As I understand it, with regards to Howard Cooper, as Dr. Fakunle was saying, he's really, they think that Howard Cooper was about 15 years old when they lynched him. And it wasn't one of those lynchings where he died immediately. You know, from what I understand, Chris, and help me if I'm wrong, is that this was a slow suffocation from hanging. Was his diagnosis, that he died slowly while he was hanging on that rope. If you could share with us, Chris, because you have that whole research piece that you've done as well. How does watching all that Dr. Fakunle has laid out with Howard Cooper's hanging, and it's symbolic, I know, of where it happened across the state as well as across the nation in those situations. Symbolically, what is the community trauma, and how does the community respond? You know, when you went around with this commission, were you hearing stories that that were still being passed down to generations that are here today?
I think part of it, Daryl, and first off, I want to commend you and your co-host because it's such a timely topic that you put together with both parts, because it's talking about horrible crimes that have been perpetuated and the complicity that is involved today, and historically the complicity that was involved years and years and years ago. Along with what Dr. Fakunle was saying, these are message crimes. It's not just about the brutality and how horribly we could murder this black person, whether or not they were guilty of any accusation that was made against them, but it was the message about what we could do to you if you, quite frankly, step out of line. So to make the execution as cruel and unusual as possible is to remind or suggest to others in that community that we are not only going to murder you, we are going to make it so unpleasant that you will have your family, your friends, your community will also have to witness this torturous act that is being perpetuated against someone who looks like you. Whether or not they deserved it, this is what we will perpetuate upon you. And it also speaks to, frankly, the perception of any black youth, being male specifically, as being a violent, dangerous criminal, regardless of what their actual age is. I mean, we don't really have to go further than saying the different instances in our own lifetimes of teenagers who have been killed because someone felt that they were dangerous and they were just teenagers.
Yes.
That I think is really the point of what lynchings were. They weren't just black people, individual black person apparently stepping out of line. It was that for all the other black people in that community to also know that this could happen to you.
Yes. Yes. And, I thank you, Dr. Fakunle, and thank you, Chris, for just, laying that out. I was watching one of the recordings that you posted from one of the meetings of the all of those in the academic community and otherwise who have been working on slavery and lynching in Maryland. And there's a couple things that just really struck me from looking and listening to that whole session from, I think, 2 years ago, was that they said that there was over 1,000 descendants that had been identified already, and that they were still working on, more descendants. I was really taken by the report that 17 of Maryland's 23 counties had lynchings, some multiple. It was just, so much there. So what I wanted to share for you to share with our audience is the recommendations. There's so many recommendations out of this report that was done. Can you share with us some of the highlight recommendations that you really think are urgently needed at this moment for us to deal with this horrific past and present?
So I will tell you that the number one takeaway from all of the hearings, the most consistent recommendation that we heard from the descendants of racial terror lynching victims, the descendants of Black communities, Black neighborhoods, some that no longer exist because of the, again, widespread terrorism that occurred generations ago. What we heard from even the descendants of perpetrators and spectators and some of the descendants of enslavers who wanted to be a part of this journey and this experience was to tell the truth. They want the truth to be out there. They want the truth to be acknowledged, not just by the people of Maryland, but by the state of Maryland, for which there is ample evidence that they played meaningful and sometimes significant roles in the loss of these Black lives. I think in addition to that, it's really hard to nail down the highlights of recommendations because it's so encompassing. But I will honor what Daryl mentioned earlier in the segment about reparations. So yes, as of our talking right now, it is quite possible that the primary champion of this commission, Jocelyn Pena-Melnick, is the new Speaker of the House. It is also quite possible that it has been voted to override the Reparations Commission bill veto, which means that commission will take place. If you look at the language, there will be one member of the Maryland Lynching Truth and Reconciliation Commission on the Reparations Commission. So we are very proud of the direct lineage that we get to create should the override take place. And it's really about, again, providing a menu of options for how repair and healing and justice can take place. So, yes, we do talk about greater accountability. That is, I think, the number one theme that you will take away from just the whole collection of recommendations. We do talk about removing qualified immunity for law enforcement officers so that there's greater accountability for the actions that they take. We do talk about, again, material reparations for the descendants of racial terror lynching victims. We do talk about repair for the communities that are still affected by the legacy of terrorism. So it's meant to cover a lot and be as helpful to the next set of work as possible.
All right, and Dr. Fakunle, we're down to our last couple of seconds here. If people want to catch this report, where do they catch the report? Where do they find it?
So they can find it on the website of the Maryland Lynching Truth and Reconciliation Commission. I just encourage people to look up the MLTRC. It will pop right up in your search engine. Go to the main website, and you will see the